Hey everybody, welcome to New Day Ministry Podcast. I'm your host, Mac, and today I have a guest from across the pond. So, Janet, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Janet Weiner, and I live in the south of France, where my husband and I run a Christian ministry training center with Youth with a Mission.
And how did we come to get to know each other now, Janet?
Yeah. Well, we just met officially 5 minutes ago, but yeah, but no, we've been corresponding, of course, but through a mutual friend, Sarah Soon, who's also, well, she writes under Sarah Soon, but she's known in real life as Sarah Ward. And so she kindly connected us.
So she's been on the show already. So those of you viewing the show right now, if you haven't seen the prior episode with Sarah, it is in the YouTube show and the podcast and on Facebook. But go check it out, right? Because Sarah's great, and her and Robert are wonderful. They're part of our church that I attend. So, and you guys now, how did you guys get to know each other?
We were in we've been in an online writers group for 2 years, and how we got into that group was through another writer, a pretty well-known writer, was running a class kind of thing for a month, and we were all in that. And during a chat on Facebook relating to something to do with the class, some of us connected and formed this group that turned into we've become really good friends, and we're all over the United States. And two of us I'm in France, and another woman is in South Africa. And so despite our time differences and all that, we wrote a book together of short stories, and it just turned into so much more than any of us dreamed. So it's a huge blessing.
That's incredible. And I'll put some of the links in the show notes and all that. But let's start off real quick with tell everybody what town you're in, what area you're kind of in, and then let's also plug where they can get a hold of your products and that kind of thing.
I am in a small town that even people in France, an hour from here, haven't heard of. So it's called Saint Hippolyte, like Saint Hippolyte du Fort, which means Saint Hippolyte of the Fort. But there's all these historical reasons for that, which I won't go into. It's a small town. God led us here to establish the YWAM Center, and even people around here go, "Why did you come here?" And it's a God story from beginning to end, and we're still living it. And then we ended up in a over 500-year-old chateau. It's not a glamorous chateau, but it is, and it has all this land around it, and God gave it to us, and it's a whole story. But that's where we are, and that's where I write, and my stories are based on this town and in my home too.
So where can everybody find your writings? Because you just said you're a writer, and you've already alluded to that. So where's the best place to find you? Facebook, Instagram, online?
Mm-hmm. Well, my website is a great place to go, and it's my whole name, JanetJoanouWeiner.com. Maybe it'll be in a linked below in the notes.
Put it right here.
Yeah,
I'll put it right here.
Right there. And there you can find my books and links to my books, but my books are all on Amazon, which is easy too. So yeah, I just have one historical novel, a second one releasing in 2 weeks, and the Christmas anthology. So when I say books, I'm like, I have books. It's still relatively new to me to have to have any, much less more than one.
So anywhere online, like your typical places, Amazon, through your website, all that type of stuff. And then do you have social media sites with your blog and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, my blog is on my website, and if you sign up on my website, then you get a notification when I do a blog post, and I do it about life and beauty and what here in the south of France, and sometimes some of my travels too, and then so I do a blog post once a month, and there's a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for that people seem to enjoy. And then I am on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest. So.
And what is it? Just your name on Facebook and that, or are you under your author name, or what are you? Okay.
No, it's just my name.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you go to the website, you can find links to all those things too. So that's that's probably the most direct way to find those.
That was my next question. Normally, because sometimes people don't keep up, musicians, myself, with our certain social platforms. So maybe the best way to get a hold of you if somebody had a question and they rewound the episode, right? I'm dating myself, rewinding it.
Yeah, no, I was with you.
Yeah, you
I
go all
was
the way back. Yeah, you go back, and somebody can just start right here in the beginning and find this info real quick. And that the quickest way to get a hold of you, would that be through your website or be through a Facebook Messenger? How would that be?
Either of those is completely fine. I am pretty active on social media, and I get the anything that goes through my website comes to me. Comes through my email, and I'm on all that all the not all the time, but every day.
Now, I gotta say, Janet, I've worked at Barnes and Nobles. I used to have my own little private library, which I donated to my school, Oral Roberts University is where I went for my studies.
Mm.
And a wing has my old library that I collected with church history stuff. But how
Oh,
would you
nice.
describe historical fiction for somebody that doesn't know what that is? Just get in a
Mhm.
nutshell. What would you say historical fiction is?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever defined it in a nutshell, so this will be my first attempt.
Yeah.
It's obviously it's fiction, but it's based on historical events that are true.
So
That
if
would be
there's
the
a
best.
historical event that happened, and then you somehow dig into it, you start doing your research, start coming up with ideas,
Mhm.
maybe praying about stuff, maybe getting some
Exactly.
influences, right, in order to somehow come up with a story. So why are you in France? Let's talk about that.
Okay. We are in France because God called us to France. My husband trained to be a pastor, and at the end of his training, we were in Southern California, and he was out on a run, and we'd been praying, and it was just like, which church should we go? We were just praying he'd be hired somewhere, and I was just gonna be pastor's wife and mother, um, and the Lord really spoke to him through a vision. And we were in a church that didn't believe in visions. It was a
Ah.
great Bible church. Wonderful, wonderful. Love that church, Peninsula Bible Church in Palo Alto, California. And very foundational, so good, was really important in our spiritual growth. But in the vision, the Lord appeared to Dudley and told him to go to France and to pray for revival. And that at a certain point, he'd be in a certain place and be like a prayer meeting, and he'd see a certain thing and person, which he hasn't told anybody, even me. He feels like that's something that he needs to keep between him and God. Um, and that when he sees that it'll be the beginning of the biggest revival France has ever seen, and it'll spread to Europe and continue. So and that all happened in 1986. And
Oh.
people were not talking about revival other than the historical revivals. If we weren't talking about modern day revivals. And we weren't geared towards missions. We weren't geared towards France. We were geared towards Southern California, maybe Arizona. Like that was oh, could we do it? Could we move that far away? So Dudley said, "Is that really you, God?" Dudley's my husband's name, and he said, "Is that really you, God?" And basically, God replayed it. It was an open vision. He'd never had that before, and it was just a very clear call. So he came home and told me, and I immediately had a peace from the Holy Spirit. I knew it was from God, which was also a miracle. Until he was so surprised, he thought, he'd expect me to be shocked or have to process it. And I said, no, if I could go anywhere in the world and serve, it would be France. Like it wasn't hard. And I also knew that's what God was doing. And I also knew when I was saying that, it was like I was saying yes to a marriage proposal. It was very serious in my spirit. And I had studied French from sixth grade through the second year of university just because I liked it. And I lived in Southern California. My teachers were like, "Why don't you study Spanish? You'll never use French." And I was like, "I like French." I just kept taking it. And I end up with a minor. I have my degrees in history, but I end up with a minor in French from university because I just took so many classes, but that was also God, preparing us. So I did not speak French well when I got here. I had a good base, but that's another whole story. But
What year
so
did
that's
you
why
get
we're in
there?
France. We arrived here in 1987.
Oh, nice. I was in high school then, and I had the reverse kind of issue. So we're from Toronto area, Niagara Falls, New York area.
Yeah.
So a lot of French Canadians and everything, and radio has French on it. So we had French teachers in our high schools, and I chose Spanish. right? And everybody told me up there, like, we have like no Mexican restaurants, it's all Italian and Eastern European
Yeah,
restaurants and everything. And
funny.
and I was just like, no, I feel like I need to get Spanish in me, right? So I did it high school a couple years. I joined the army and I ended up getting stationed in Central America.
I
And then
love it. That is the exact same story, but
it's just
you
like kind
know,
of
that's, I
and then I
love
end
it.
up here in Tulsa all these years now, off and on for 20 something years, and general contracting last year, and I cruised. They're all Spanish speaking, and some were
Oh,
from Honduras where I was stationed, and they knew that I
oh,
showed pictures. I never show anybody these pictures. Nobody cares.
yeah,
And I showed
yeah,
them
yeah.
pictures. I was airborne infantry, so I lived in the jungles and all that stuff. And I showed them the pictures, and they're like, "Oh, they know that." I was just like, "This is really weird." So, anyways, you're kind of like
Oh my,
the other one. I could
yeah.
have used French, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, no, but that just shows how God's ways are not man's ways, right?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I set my own path, but he had another one. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so
And
you
it
got
doesn't
there
make,
around what, 86-ish or something? 87,
yeah,
88,
we were
88?
here the first time, I should say, in 1987, and we were here
Mm,
about 7 years, and we were most of that time in Paris, and we were
okay.
with Youth Mission in Paris,
Was
and
YWAM
those,
around back then? Because I heard about it in the 90s, 2000 era.
yeah.
Was that all a thing back then
YWAM
too? Okay.
started in the very late 60s. It's about 60 years old now. So yeah,
All right.
yeah,
So
no,
now you guys
really
end
was
up
around.
going over there and you find yourself as what they call expats, right? You're over there, you're
Yeah,
overseas, like all my
yeah,
friends in different areas of Europe. I guess that's what they call themselves. And
yeah,
so you're in there. So where you were by Paris, right? Paris and all that stuff. So
yeah.
how did it feel being over there trying to do ministry? Did you feel like God had your back and you're peaceful about it, but yet you were a fish out of water? How did it feel?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
huh?
we felt that. Yes. God definitely had our back, but we also felt like we were fish out of water. It was very clear. And still to this day, I mean, it's very clear we're Americans. Like that doesn't go away. And my mistake that round, we then went back to America in the middle, and then now we've been back in the south of France for 15 years. And what I learned from that first round was I tried so hard to be French that I started to lose, like I didn't, you cannot lose your identity as an American of the country you're from, but I became ashamed of it in a way that I shouldn't have. And like I believe in learning the language, learning the cultural ways of behaving and adapting, and in those kinds of ways, being polite, things like that. But at the end of the day, I'm always going to be a woman who was born in California, who is, born and grew up in Southern California. And, I can't change that. I can't, no
You can't
matter
get
what.
away
So I
from
just,
it.
I can't, and I shouldn't. That's what God decided. I didn't even decide all that. So
It's
um,
true.
I need to be myself, but yet, I now speak French. We've lived here a long time, so we know how to, but we're still they're very aware that we're the Americans,
I
but
still down here in Tulsa. We moved down here 2001. Yeah, it was my first semester when 9/11 happened. I was at
mm,
ORU and we were married with kids, and I still to this day. This is what 2024. We've gone back to New York a couple of times and come back, and
mm,
they still I get called out all the time. Like and they switch on that Oklahoma accent and. I don't have it. And it's like they're like, you're not from
yeah,
here. You're not from here.
yeah,
I'm like,
you're not
okay,
from here.
but I pay taxes and own houses. But here's what I want to
Yeah.
ask you about is for those people that have never lived in a foreign country and been submersed in it. I've been there. So when I used to leave the base in Panama, we'd go on missions in the jungles for days. There was the drug wars back then, and then we come back into the base in Panama, and I would just head out onto the beaches and areas with another guy and play soccer, football, and I
Fun.
would go out
Mhm.
there and just be immersed and like they were just speaking
Mm,
everything and not
mm.
knowing a lot. So describe for everybody how that kind of feels as an expat where you're in an area, where people are just they're not the same as what you're used to. So describe that for a
Mhm.
minute.
Oh yeah, I think for me it's mostly in social settings. Being and since the French are all about, are very focused on the table and food, and thankfully we've been invited to people's homes a lot, and both believers and not yet believers. And so, but there's just a whole, I will probably to my dying day never adjust to being at a table for 5 hours for a meal. And that's just, 4 is minimum. So that's one way, and yet I know it's coming, I have to prepare. I have to pray and fast. No, but it's just, my American clock is still, I've slowed down a little, but there's still a different, I was raised with a different rhythm where you don't stay. And I did grow up in a family that sat down and ate at a meal at a table, but the way that the French eat, that's a place that I still see cultural, and I've adapted a lot to it, but there's just a difference. And I still to this day want to offer people something to drink pretty soon after they come to my house, and French people don't for the first half hour or so. And I kind of know that. And I try to make myself wait, but I can never make it past about 12 minutes. Offering, do you want water? Do you want something, do you want some juice? Do you want coffee? And because it feels unhospitable to me to do. So I'm not on the beaches playing football in Panama, but I'm in the dining rooms in France or my own, and trying to be make the bridge to their culture, but at the same time they understand I'm not their culture, so there's grace there. I get away with things because I'm not, they don't expect me to be.
In the Latin culture, I come from the Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls area, and the whole Northeast just moves quick. So I had to slow down my speaking, especially down here in Oklahoma when I was teaching for a while as a grad assistant, undergrad, and I had to slow down in my lectures and stuff or preaching when I'm preaching. But when I was in Central America, if you ask somebody how they're doing, you might be there 10 minutes or 15 minutes on the street. Because they're going to tell you oh, I have pain here. Oh, I'm not doing this right. I'm like, whoa, I was just walking by. I was just saying, hey, how you doing? And they found that rude. They found me rude. People I used to hang out with, they thought I was being rude because I was just like, no, how you doing? How you doing? And I just kept going.
Yeah.
So there's these cultural differences. I'm like, I didn't know we were supposed to answer that.
Yeah. They're being literal.
Yeah, they're literally walking by you and how you doing? They stop. They just come to you. Oh.
Tell me.
Now I know everything about you. Okay. So I wanted to say I saw some really cool pictures on your Instagram site and everything about the area. And I love photography and the visual thing, YouTube and all that stuff, and playing guitar. I love seeing cool imagery. Sometimes I see imagery when I'm worshiping through my guitar music and stuff. You see images, and same thing with the intercessory prayer, right? You can see images and it helps you pray for things. So talk about some of the sites real quick around there and the influence that it has on you in the environment.
Yeah. Well, God is so given me such a gift to let me live in this town because it's super historic. And it goes back to Roman times, which is ridiculous, really old. I mean, there's Roman ruins on one side of town, and you go, oh my goodness, the Roman Empire extended. Okay. And you're mind blown. And there's a house down the street from me. There's these rows of houses, and over the door, most houses are stone, and over the door it says 1776. And some American friends were visiting the other day, and we all just stood, and I go, yeah, no, this house has been here when we were being established as a country, as our country of America. But and there's older houses that say 16 something. So for me, I think the main, the overall sense of things are old here, really old. And when we were still organizing America and becoming America, this place was here and it was a town. And so that is one thing. And then the particular chateau, old castle that we live in is, I researched on it because I was curious, who built it and who lived here. And I found things in the archives going back to 1444, and there was a family living here with 8 kids, and blew my mind, and then it goes up to this, this chateau used to also include the house and the lands next door that were all vineyards and the 2 water mills down the streets. Now we're all separate owners. And just the other day we were in a meeting because they're trying to divide up the water that goes through. And I thought, oh, we're all back together again. But so I'm always kind of carrying the sense of history of then and now. And so that's been inspiring to me. And what also was interesting is when I was doing that research, I found out that well, everybody in this town knows that in 1944, the Nazis came down the street right in front of my door, the SS Nazis, looking for young men hiding from the obligatory work service. They were looking for them to send to Germany to work in the war machine. And they hid here because there's a lot of mountains and caves, and it's a good kind of place to hide. And families hid them too, and later, and they were hiding Jews as well in this area, all through this region and other parts of France too. And but the Nazis came and they ended up moving in the chateau and using it as a headquarters, and then hanging a young man on the bridge out in front as an example. So that's a whole very traumatic event. There's plaques in the town. They put flowers out twice a year where it happened, and come have a whole service there. I mean, we're, all these years later, and I'm glad. I when I walk by, if I'm aware of it that day, if I remember, I go stand there and as well. And but there's just this sense of history and trauma too. But then I also, when I was researching, I found out that in the end of the 1600s, Louis XIV sent his dragoons, his mounted soldiers, down the same road. And he sent 1,200 dragoons to this town of 4,000, and we're still a town of 4,000 because there were so many Huguenot, the French Protestants, and he wanted to suppress them. And I started mixing up the two stories. I'm like, they seem so similar, like this big, massive force. SS Nazis are the kind of hardcore, the more hardcore groups within the Nazis, and then the dragoons were the mounted soldiers. He didn't just send a small group to kind of say, be loyal to the king. And the Huguenots were loyal to the king. They never weren't loyal. It's just that they, being Protestant, weren't of the king's faith. So that had never happened before the 100 years. It was about 100 years after the Reformation, but until the Reformation, there was only one church. Right. So, and then that was the faith of the king. So he was still wrestling with that. And because he was very into power and control, that was a problem for him. So, so then when I just really felt like God was highlighting that to me too, that this is a small place, but it's attracted a lot of spiritual, attention from authorities, but there's to suppress it more than seems normal in the natural. So
it is very interesting, actually.
Yeah. So those things inspired the historical novels. So because the story was waiting. I mean, oh my goodness, the incidents in this, the one I just finished, the second one, I added a whole thing at the back to tell all of the things that were in the story that were true, because some of the craziest things in the story are the true things. I wouldn't have made them up. I wouldn't have thought they would be believable, but they, I would have wouldn't have gone that far. And they, so I was like, I got to put a chapter in here. Plus it's just so cool to go, that cool thing that happened in the story, that happened. That really happened. And
do you have any footnotes in your books? Because I've read historical fiction books that sometimes have little footnotes that do tell people that that's actually a real incident. Do you have anything like that at all in your books?
Well, I just put it all in a chapter at the end because I wanted to, and so I called it Stranger Than Fiction.
There you go. That was my next point, was either at the end or maybe during the story. Okay, so you do bring people into it. Okay, cool.
Yeah. There's just, there's only footnotes of biblical verses in the story, but you don't want to take them out of the story while they're in it. But that's back there. Yeah. Because I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because where we're from, Fort Niagara, there was a French Indian War and all that stuff up where we're from, and there's placards. You can go down trails down Lewiston. It's the south escarpment of Niagara Falls, the lower portion, and there you can go through the placards. It seems kind of old, 1600s, 1700s, all that kind of stuff, but there's not a lot of it. It's not like houses like you guys. You're immersed in it, so it's like this blanket or like a weather kind of thing, having it on you, like humidity coming in, right? So that sounds great. I can't wait to read some of it. Now, you have the blog, real quick, is named Fig and Vine. So why did you choose the name for that?
I love that question. I when I was planning to start a blog, I was walking around our property, and the Lord gave us this shell, came with a big, huge, bald, pretty watchtower. It's crazy. So I was just walking around praying about, what should I call it, Lord? And then I saw one of our fig trees, and then I literally saw some grapevines we have. And I'm like, well, I like figs. I like grapevines. It was like the Lord just sort of drew my attention to him, and then I was like, oh, fig and vine. And then I was like, that's just it. It just worked. And then later I realized, oh, there's a verse that's like every man should sit beneath his vine and fig tree, but it didn't come from the verse. It came from the land. But then it all worked. But yeah.
I love it. That's really cool, man. I've helped some Italian friends of mine plant fig trees back in Buffalo area. So they're really
Oh,
interesting.
they're
They're
delicious. Yeah.
they're interesting. I love it. And I was checking out the blog and stuff, so I encourage people to get on there. The links will be and everything. So let's delve back into your past a little bit, because like you said, you grew up in California, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I've only been down to like Long Beach and Hollywood and Malibu, all that stuff.
Mhm.
But so was it a Christian household that you grew up in, or was it not?
No,
Okay.
no. I grew up in the Los Angeles area, and we did go to church. We went to Episcopal church, which was great in the sense that I learned all those prayers by heart, and like the Apostles' Creed, which is basic theology. It's just excellent. So, and the Lord's Prayer. I mean, there was a lot of really good things, but there was no Bible teaching. There was, and some of the hymns are beautiful, and I still love them today. So there are many good things from it, but there's things that were missing. And then I went to a YMCA camp on the island of Catalina, which is off the coast of Southern California. And I just went because it was fun. I went with my friends, and there were Christian women that ran this camp. And every night at the campfire, they told us about accepting Jesus into your heart and making him Lord of your life. And I was like, oh, what? I never heard of that. So, and I believed in him. I just didn't know that step. So it became really clear to me I either needed to take that step or stop believing in him. It was just the Holy Spirit made it really clear to me. And the leaders were he really used them as well. And so I accepted him into my heart. And then I did it about 40 more times because I didn't cry or have an experience. So I didn't think it worked because it was in the 70s, because I am also a child of the 70s, and I'm a little older than you, but so and it was around the time of the Jesus people, and there was all these testimonies, and people's testimonies were really dramatic, but I was 13, so I didn't have a dramatic testimony. And I mean, then a year later, I went back to that camp, and they did one of the teachings was on you're saved by faith. They did the skit. I can still see the skit. And it
That's
was like,
cool.
oh, you're saved by faith. Well, then I'm saved because I have faith. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. But it was a very, I don't want to say intellectual, but it was a choice. It wasn't I didn't have any emotions. And so I thought I needed emotions to validate it, but I didn't, that was just the way God worked with me. And
Everybody's
my
got a
mom,
different testimony.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I
So
wanted to cry.
how did it affect your family then? How did they feel about all that?
Yeah. They were respectful of it. And I said, Mom, in the morning, I'm going to be doing this thing called a quiet time. So I don't want to be interrupted. Don't call me I'm going to be in my room for a little while, after breakfast or whatever it was. And she was like, okay. But they stopped going to church pretty soon after that. I think they got nervous. Well, more and more Jesus people kept coming to our church and giving testimonies. So I think it got a little less predictable for them. They both believe, my parents. My dad is no longer here, but I believe he's in heaven. I believe he left this earth with faith in Jesus. So they were respectful. They didn't stop me or anything. And
Cool.
years later, my mom said she noticed a huge difference in me right away, and how how I behaved. And I was 13. So that was a testimony, because I barely knew how to be different. So that had to be, and plus the other great thing was that the Holy Spirit did was at the camp, they said, read your Bible every day. And I did. And I had this little good news for modern man. It was one of the
Good
first. Did you know
news.
that
Yeah, I know the good news. Yeah. It's
one?
really
It was like
cool.
this
So
little,
it sounds. I love taking phrases from it.
I haven't seen one in years. I'd
You can get
love
it.
to
You
get
can get it
those
online.
little yeah, I bet little stick people. And
Mm-hmm.
um
Yep.
and I would read that every night, and it would, like, I had a Bible study with God. Like, he would bring it. I'd go, okay, I'd read the Beatitudes. Okay, I can do that at school tomorrow. That will help. Like, and I was alone because my church wasn't teaching biblical stuff, and I was a ballet dancer, so I was doing ballet every day. So, and for the next 3 years, I was just the Bible and me. And then I stopped doing ballet so I could have a life. And I started going to Young Life, and I went into the first Bible study with Young Life. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody's going to help me even go further. You know, it was such a, and be in fellowship and have worship and all that. So it was good.
That's cool. Were there other siblings in the household, or are you the youngest, oldest?
I'm the oldest, and I have 3 younger siblings.
There you go. So you're
Yeah.
leading the pack, right? You're
Yeah.
plowing through everything for
Yeah.
everybody.
That's right.
So
That's
did any of
right.
your siblings ever come to church with you or anything, or were they just too
Well,
much younger than you?
yeah, they were kind of in a different, I'm 4, 7, and 9 years older than they are. And
Mhm.
so it's just kind of in 2 different worlds, but yeah.
Our youngest is 14 and our oldest is 27.
Yeah, there you
So,
go.
my wife and I have been married 28 years now, going on 28.
Mhm.
And it's like, but yeah, our 14-year-old has a different life. He goes on nice
Yes.
vacations. He's with us by himself all
Yes.
the time. The other kids were, my wife and I were in school having kids. It was like, we were just cramming
Yeah.
minivans and like, we had no money. It's just like, we're just
Yeah.
staying
Yeah.
somewhere near the beach, maybe in the same state, not at a
You're
resort.
right. That's right.
So it's
That's
like,
right.
so yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. As an older sibling, I understand that. So so now, were you interested in writing back then? Was that something you were? Did you read a lot back then besides the Bible?
I
Did you
read
read
a
some?
lot. Yeah, I
Ah,
did.
interesting.
I didn't start writing till I was much further into adulthood, but I read from when I was very, very young. And partly because I wasn't the same I didn't have siblings my age at home. And so I think plus I love reading. So I was alone a lot in my room, not like sadly alone, but I like
Right.
to be in the room
Yeah.
and read. And so I read kind of voraciously. And I loved the Little House in the Prairie books and read those
Oh,
over and over and over.
Laura
And
Ingalls Wilder.
Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I just loved them because, well, they're as do millions of people. But I think something inside me, I always knew that she wrote those when she became an adult. And so then I would like kind of think about my life like, oh, if I wrote a story, I could put it in that. And also I would think, oh, I would be on an escalator and think, oh, if Laura came to visit me, I'd have to explain to her about this. I had this whole world with Laura in it, and a world where I wrote stories like Laura did. So yeah, there we
There's
go.
nothing wrong with that because I first started reading in junior high at the Catholic grade school, and it was Lord of the Rings. So it was like Lord of the
Mm.
Rings with a buddy of mine. He's now a doctor back up in Buffalo and everything. And we would just go walk around the playground describing it while everybody else is throwing footballs around and hockey stuff. And we're talking about Lord of the
That's right.
Rings and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then,
Mm.
but like what you're saying though is interesting how stories can get in you. And like later, I lived out in the country far from the suburb, dairy farm communities, and my dad was a mechanic out there. And anyways, I'd be out in the fields and going through woods and stuff, and I had one or two friends that lived near me. That's it. We're still friends to this
Mhm.
day. And we
Oh,
would
no.
feel like we're in Lord of the Rings, or if I was by myself,
Yeah.
like what would Frodo
Yeah.
do right now, or what would Sam do
Yeah.
right now, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean. So I mean, you were
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about that feeling, I mean, that's what stories can do for you.
It can.
They can
Hmm.
light the fire, and songs and music too. For me
Hmm.
now, as I've gotten
Hmm.
older, I've gotten more into music and playing guitar. So
Mm.
your favorite books, were they like the Laura Ingalls type stuff like that? Was
Yeah,
that your
all
favorite
of
ones?
them. And at the library, you probably remember this, that if you checkbook out like the public or the school library, there's a little pocket with a little card and you had to write your name on it. It was like my name. Yeah. And then they'd stamp it. And then I check out another Laura Ingalls Wilder. Like 3/4 of the names on each of those cards were mine because I hogged those books. So, um,
That's pretty
yeah.
funny. So you probably knew the section real well, where to go. You didn't have to ask anybody.
Oh,
You're like,
100%.
yeah.
100%.
All right. So then, so obviously those types of writings started influencing you. And then did you read different writings as you got into like college age and all that kind of stuff? And did you go to
Yes.
college? That's the other thing.
Yes. Yes, I
All right.
did. I went to UCLA and I
Ah.
studied history. And yes, I even before then, between Laura Ingalls Wilder days and then I loved any kind of novel, but I always was drawn to historical novels. I remember picking them out of the library when even I was a little bit older, like like a historical novel about one of the wives of Henry VIII, for example. And I remember reading that book, And because I just was drawn to history, and I was drawn to story. So, but any interesting story, different biographies too. I read Florence Nightingale, and just different, those kinds of books, stories about real people. I think that's what I like about history too, is that they were real people. So it just sort of, I love the imaginary. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're like, when it's an extraordinary story and you go, that really happened. Somebody didn't just make that up. That person lived that. There was a person that lived that, or people that lived that. So
That's a
along
good
those
point,
lines.
because like people like my wife, she runs marathons for St. Jude and all that. She just ran the Oklahoma City Marathon. I think it
Nice.
was her 30th marathon. Her and her friends the other day.
Wow.
Yeah, we're going to Scotland in a couple weeks. She's running the Edinburgh Marathon. Probably go to London
Oh,
pretty soon.
nice.
But the thing is they find a lot of inspiration in real stories. All her friends, they're
Mhm.
constantly looking for who's the runner that came from nowhere. Who's this story of this?
Mm.
And that happens in business too. So my friends that are
Mm.
finance guys, they're constantly reading about real people that became, they had bankrupt and now they're this. So
Mm.
you're right. I
Yes.
think there's this appeal to to our human frailty of our human nature, of like somebody overcame something, and then we know the scripture, right, by the blood of the lamb, and what
Mhm.
blood of the
The
lamb, the
testimony.
word of our testimonies, right, we become
Yeah.
overcomers. And how
Yeah.
cool is going back to, I'm looking back, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking about you being younger, and how you heard testimonies and how powerful they were, and then
Mhm.
when you were
Yes.
reading Laura Ingalls Wilder, that's basically like historical fiction.
Yes.
I,
Yes, it
I,
is.
I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm just basing on my own little readings of her stuff years ago. It's
Mhm.
just in the, you're like kind of reading what happened in
Mhm.
America, but with a story.
Mhm. Yes,
So I think it
exactly.
seems like
Yeah.
God's been like really putting that on your heart since you've been a young one.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
true.
I
It's
think
true.
it's
That's
kind of neat. Now
another
you're
good
fleshing
connection
it out
for me.
later, right? Now you're
Yeah.
writing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is really a dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really amazed.
So when were you were you influenced by different people as you got older then? Let's go back to that subject. Were there
Mhm.
certain writers in particular? Because
Yeah.
I find a lot of people that are bookies, they have their authors. You know what I mean? I was a big
Mhm.
Madeleine L'Engle fan.
Oh, she's
I read all
great.
her
Yeah.
books. Like, oh, but so go
Mhm.
ahead, tell me somebody that in your adult life who's been an influence
Yeah.
possibly, or a few of them.
Yeah, thanks. I love these questions. It's very fun.
All right.
Bodie Taney, I don't Bodie and Brock Taney are a couple. She started writing, and then he does so much research that they write them together now. But they've written over 70 historical fiction novels.
Wow.
And when I was in the 90s and I was a young mother starting to raise our kids, I got a hold of her. She has a series called the Zion Chronicles and one called the Zion Covenant, and I cannot recommend them enough. I knew so little about Israel and the story of Israel, but again, it's all story, and she's a fantastic storyteller. Um, and the characters are very, very real, and they're involved in stories, but along the way you're learning history, and she's a very strong believer. So there's truth all woven in, and their struggles. And so I loved it. It was a great story. So it was just a fun, relaxing, especially young mother. And it was the days before there was all multiple TV options and choices, and it was actually better. So when I had time off, I would read, and so it was entertaining, but I was learning. It wasn't just fluff, and it was inspirational. If we want to put it, I'd come away feeling like strengthened in my faith, and I was like, this is such a blessing to have all this in a book. And I wish I could. I remember so many times I'd be reading her stories going, I wish I could do this. How did she do this? I wish I could do this. So there's this longing there to be able to do it. So then years later, years later, I didn't start actually writing. Well, I didn't start actually writing historical fiction till about 7 years ago.
Ah,
So
interesting.
yeah.
Okay, so you started about 29. Good job.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. It was after a significant birthday.
That's all right. No big deal. Age
Because I
is just
thought it's
as.
now or never. Not that I'm going to like die soon, but I turned 60 7 years ago, and I thought I had better. I mean, and I literally said to the Lord, when is there going to be space in my life? Because we've been running the ministry, we've been raising kids, we've been moving around the world, we've traveled to 40 countries doing missions things. When is there going to? And that's all great, but
Yeah.
when you need some space to, to do this. And then I got burnt out and I had to take 8 months off. So during that time, I started writing. I mean, the burnout had built up, but as I took time off to cope with that, then I started writing. And then now I've modified my schedule and I do writing. Over half my time is writing.
You know, I love, how many kids do you have?
4.
4, right?
Ages 4, yeah, like you, and 4 grandchildren. So,
oh, nice.
yeah.
We're catching you. We got 2. We got 2
Yeah. I'm a bit ahead of you in age too.
But yeah, so you were balancing everything, and I feel you on this one because I empathize with it because I have felt the calling to ministry, and I did a lot after I got saved in the late 90s, early 2000 years, and all that stuff. And then music ministry, and I gave it up when God told me to put it down about 2013. And then I walked into the Vineyard Church where Sarah is, about a little over 2 years ago. And it was like, I just felt God was like, time to pick it up, time to go again. And now all of a sudden I've got a little more time because I only have one kid at home now going to school. We got kids living in different states and stuff. And, and you're like, you're right. Next thing you know, I'm like, similar to you, like now I'm bringing this up for a reason because you find that this time has come, but now you got to do something with it.
Yep.
Right. And now I want to ask you about discipline. Because you said something that I'm keying in on. You said something that now you make time for it. You had time and you used that. You jumped into it, but now you're making time for this to happen.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a minute because there might be some young writers out here or possible future writers or somebody who was writing and wants to get back into it and they're hearing this and getting inspired right now. So let's talk for a second about the discipline of writing.
Yeah, there's a lot of different approaches to it. And I think like everything, you have to find what works for you. I've read, different people's ways they do it. And you have to also adjust for the seasons you're in. But my best writing time is in the morning. So I have my morning routine. I have a certain time frame. Loosely, I need to be at my desk and I give it until lunch. So I get in 3 or 4 hours before lunch. And once I eat lunch, then the energy starts waning. And so I save that for the housework and the, other things, even gardening, things I love, but that don't take the mental focus of writing. So that's what works for me. Some people do it when they first get up. I need to eat and have coffee, have my quiet time. I need to do a few things first still just to get rolling. But, some people
write. Same spot? Do you go to the same spot all the time?
Yeah.
Or do you
I do.
Set, okay, so that you're one of
right
the people
here.
that goes to the same spot. Oh, right here. Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Right here where you see me. I have, on occasion.
Feel the inspiration.
Yeah, right here, just because it's my desk and I can shut the door. And we live in the back wing of the chateau that we live in, and the rest of our ministry colleagues live attached. They can't get into our house without coming around, but there's people in and out of our house a lot, and so I if I'm in here with the door shut, I know I won't get interrupted and or drawn into things. I like these people, so it's not even like they're just rudely interrupting me. It's like I'm like, oh hi, how are you? And then I'm distracted. And so if I'm in here, the door is shut. My husband doesn't even come in unless there's something urgent, and it's just my set apart time. And I have tried different ways of saying I'll get this many pages done or this many words done. That has worked, but I don't do that. It worked for me for a while. And when I was in it was a sticky point, and I was just like, okay, you have to write, I forget what it was, let's say 500 words, which is like a page. It's not even that much. And then usually once you do that, you do more. Or I'd say I only have to write for a short amount of time, and then usually you do more. But so I've tried all those kinds of things. Now I think I've really developed a habit. If I'm at my desk between 9 and 10 in the morning and I'm going to write until 1, and I really try to not do the other writing related things during that time. There's a lot right now. I am doing other writing related things because I just finished a book, but when I'm in the full writing, and I'm going to start book 3 pretty soon, but I'm not quite ready. I just finished book 2 and I'm doing all the publishing and publicity stuff for book 2. So I am doing that now, but generally I save that for other parts of the day as well. So I give my best brain energy to the time I have. But if you're a young mother or you have another job that isn't, my job's flexible because it's a ministry job and my husband runs the ministry center. And this is, I used to do it with him, but I stepped back from that. And so I still am involved, but only part-time and only in the afternoons. So I'm able to be more flexible, but I'm in my 60s and, I'm in a different stage of life and my children are grown up and elsewhere. But I think, yeah, but I think, if you have young children, you're going to have to do the get up early and do an hour before they get up. Or I have a friend who can do it at night, that just works for her. So I think it's better to do 15 minutes every day than to not do it at all, honestly, like some kind of consistency. And the more you do it, and even if it's just kind of garbage and you're going to throw it's like warming up, like your wife, she doesn't go, I'm going to go run a marathon every day. I don't know what marathon runners do, but I do know they don't do that. They have probably all kinds of
Training.
different training things that they do, but she's doing something probably all the time so that she can show up and do the marathon. And writing a book is like a marathon, I'm sure, in the sense of like, you just, when you sit, but like to get there, you have to be having developed those muscles and those habits. But I love this one, I forget, some famous author that everybody would know if I could remember, like William Faulkner or somebody like that. But he said, somebody asked him about like, what do you do if you don't have inspiration? I forget even what the question was. He says, I remember the answer. I make sure I'm inspired every day at 10 o'clock at my desk, like the inspiration. And it's not like he doesn't wait to be inspired to write. He's like, that's whatever his time was, he'd sit down and he makes sure, you do everything else so that you're ready to go then. And then there's routines you can do. Like I start out by reading what I wrote yesterday. That kind of warms you up too. And usually when I leave what I wrote the day before, I like to, okay, I'm going to pick up here and I have a few ideas of where I'm going to go or what my problem is that I have to figure out before then. And I try not to think about it, but sometimes I'll be on a walk later and I'll be thinking about it. And that's okay if it just kind of comes naturally, but I try to give my brain a rest from it, but I think our brains continue to work on things a little bit. and that's cool. I'll be walking along. Yeah. In an ideal, I'll come and I'll go, okay, thanks, Lord. Plus, I left this out. Most important part of all, the first thing I do every single time is pray and invite the Holy Spirit in it. Like I cannot do this without him flowing through me, writing. It's my brain and body and hands, but it's his inspiration. It's his gifts.
It's his gifts and talents that you're using.
Yeah. Right? And it's from him and it's for him. And so so that is literally the most important thing. And I do that first and just pray until I really am focused on him and have fully invited him and, sensed his presence. And then other times when I'm writing, if I'm stuck, I'm like, okay, what do I say? Like, what do I do? And, and then there's other times I'll just go, okay, I'll just make something up and I start writing and I'm like, that's pretty good. And it's like the Holy Spirit's just giving me things that I didn't even plan to put in. I'm like, oh, that character is going to do that. Oh, that person just ran away again. And, and sometimes you edit those things out, but most of the time later, I'm like, those were great ideas. Thank you. And they did not come from me. Like they just kind of dropped in, but you still have to show up and do the work, so
it's are you one of the people that will, if you have an idea, you just record it, you're talking to your phone at all, if you're walking somewhere? Because there's musician friends of mine that come up with lyrics and song stuff, and they'll just be anywhere, at a grocery store, they'll just be like talking into the phone. Do you do that kind of thing too, just to make sure you get it?
I type it into a note in my phone, but yes, 100%, because if not, you will lose it. And sometimes I look back at even the note and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I wrote that down because I would not have remembered. And I think it really is inspiration from the Holy Spirit. You've got to catch it when it, and then you can put it down. And sometimes it's a good idea. Sometimes it's not something that's going to stay, but it'll lead you to something else. It's a whole process. So
I love it because I've been digging back into guitar again. I'm playing with a guy from Serbia. He's here in Tulsa and he's a jazz guy. He's amazing. So I've been doing like jazz stuff and I never thought I'd get into that, but it's really kind of not so much jazz, but it's jazz principles and I use it for worship. So when we get into like instantaneous, spontaneous worship, it's a misnomer in a way because the spontaneity happens from the discipline all week,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which
Right.
I think a writer can
Right.
understand that and
Yeah.
empathize with that. So if I'm
Yeah.
not sitting here like my guitar's back there, if I'm playing my Strat all the time, 15 minutes a day is better than nothing. Better to
Yes.
maintain than regain. So just keep trying every
Yes.
day.
Yeah.
Even if it was a bad practice session, there's no bad. It's just keep going. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, as I'm learning how to play out of music, in music, kind of like you, right? And you're just throwing stuff out sometimes, see where it goes. Just get it going.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you never know. Like you land something just like a song. All of a sudden, a progression shows up, and you're like, "What? Like, wow, that's so cool. I'm gonna keep that."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I find a
Love
big
it.
parallel
Yeah.
between like music and
Yes.
writing. And so,
Yeah.
okay, so how long does it take you, or how long has it taken you to like do a book? And I'm not talking about just general ideas first. I'm talking about actually just sitting down and writing and finishing it.
Yeah. The first book took 5 years,
Oh,
and and I worked a lot of that 5 years on it. It just took a lot of revise because I had never written a novel. I hadn't done creative writing really. And so the learning curve was huge. And with historical novels, there is a lot of research. So I had done a research prior to that, but then as you go, you're like, oh, well, now I need to know that. I didn't realize I need to know what kind of farm animals they would have in the backyard. Like, did they have cows at that time? And
right.
now we have a problem with boars on our property. Did they have boars then? So you find these tangential things that you have to research. And so like, I now make notes of those. I don't let myself stop and go on a rabbit hole during the writing time, because then you're on a rabbit hole.
That's wisdom. That's wisdom right
Yeah,
there.
I just get sucked into research. But so between all that, it did take 5 years, but the second one, it took me 2 years.
See, now
So
this is very parallel, very parallelish, I guess. Not really a word, but
yeah,
it's a
make a word.
very. I can draw a parallel between this and musicians. So when a band puts out their first album, like my friends' bands, and it can be awesome. Well, they say you've had your whole life to write the first album,
Yes.
and the second album you've only got a year or two. So
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Look at
Yeah.
balloons. I don't know why it's coming
What's
up.
happening?
I
Yeah,
don't
I didn't
know,
do that.
but it
Really
does it.
funny.
But the thing is, it's a setting. But you
That's
see,
so
my point though is you've had your whole
yes.
life to write your
Yes,
first book and prepare for it. Now
exactly.
your gap maybe changes 2 years or so, and
Yeah.
now you said you just finished your second, and you've got one
Yeah.
more. You're in the works. You already got probably something going already, right? For
Yeah,
maybe a
I
third book.
in two more ideas for this
Oh,
series. So two
nice.
more based on historical things that happened. And it was really cool. Not long after I really finished the second one, I'm still in the publishing process, but finished the writing and editing. I was just got this, I was resting actually and reading a book about writing. And some of the things it was saying, it was just about ways you could handle the opening scenes or something like that. And I all of a sudden got this, just a bunch of ideas. I know the basic ideas. It's set in World War II when the Nazis come, as I
Mm,
mentioned earlier, that
wow.
whole and move into the chateau here. So of course, I'm going to use all that, but like some more of the specifics started to fall into place. And I was like, thank you, Lord. That is so cool. I was not looking for it. I was literally laying down reading a book, thinking about writing, and just kind of resting. And then I got a download. So I don't have the whole book, but I got a bit more. And so, yeah, that's
So,
fun.
explain to everybody real quick, what are your stories about again? So, you mentioned it earlier, but I'd
Yeah.
rather have you just explain it for a second. Like your first book in general, what's it about?
The first book is called Though Darkness Descend, and it's about at the end of the 17th century, and while it's still legal to be a Protestant in France. A few years later, after the book takes place, it's not legal anymore. But Louis XIV was already suppressing the Huguenot, the French Protestants, a lot. He sent 1,200 dragoons to our town, and the Huguenots fled to the mountains and then came back. All these things happened. So that's the basic story. But I also, um, a lot of historical people are in it, but I also invented the main family and the main character. And her struggle is that she's a Huguenot, but she doubts God because she prayed when her little sister was sick and her little sister died. So these are no spoiler alerts. This is all pretty much it's on the back of the book almost. She doesn't know if she believes in God, and now she's under threat and she might die for her faith because the
Mm,
dragoons are there and they've moved into the chateau. It's a whole thing that
cool.
happened, and lots and lots of Huguenots died for their faith, but she doesn't have faith. So in each book, I took the historical thing, but I also took a struggle that I think every human goes through, every believer goes through. Like,
Awesome.
how can God be good and not answer this prayer? Like letting my little baby sister die, for example, like that, so how can we have faith? So it's her journey, her spiritual journey, as well as physically what happens. And then
Man,
in book
Janet, why don't you take something hard?
yeah, I know, really. Yeah, that was,
This doesn't sound I mean, it sounds
yeah.
awesome, don't get me wrong, but I think
No,
it
I
sounds
know what you mean.
intriguing because it sounds deep.
Yeah.
But wow, you didn't just write about some person who, is hanging out in the town and he made shoes,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
wow. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just like, this
No,
is
no,
pretty
I love
cool.
it. I love
It's
the
pretty
reaction.
intense.
It's
Yeah.
perfect. It was.
Yeah.
It was. And yeah, I had to be honest with myself too, and really let the whole, yeah, that's great. I'm a
Wow.
great nerd. So yeah, that's why it took 5 years. So, and then the second one is 17 years later. It's been illegal to be a Protestant for 16 of those years. And so they've been living under the repression. And it's actually the daughter of the first, the main character, the first one. And
Wow.
but she has a lot of fear. She lives at a fearful time, but she also doesn't really believe God loves her fully. And so she has a lot of fear and tries to control things. So that's her inner journey. And the outer journey is that she's also, during that time, there was legitimately in this region an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and it was called the prophetic movement of the Seven, and all these young people were preaching. Have you read about it in church history?
I
Maybe
have
it's
like
like
I
kind of like the Quakers. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
always teen.
it's small and it was like it's been a hot minute, but yeah.
Yeah. They hardly touch on it, but when you dig, there's a lot. And I've in French, there's a lot, and I've read French people who went to disprove them and couldn't disprove, like I've read, it's been fascinating, but these young people, some babies, some as young as 5 and 6, and then a lot of youth would just start what they meant by prophesying is they would basically preach, and they could preach whole biblical passages, and they were uneducated or not educated theologically, for sure. Some were literally illiterate and some were educated, but not trained to teach the Bible. They spoke in perfect French, and they didn't in this region. They spoke a dialect called Occitan, and they called to repentance, and people repented, and and so that was the whole thing, and they all got thrown in jail. Anyway, my main character is one of those. So, and she's not sure she likes this because it's scary, and so it's like how that whole thing. And then the church is underground. It meets in caves, and so there's all that. And then and if they get caught, they'll get killed or sent to prison for life, and the men to row in the galley boats in Marseille until they die. And it just was a horrible time for them. So and then there also during that time, then some of the Huguenots rose up and revolted and fought the authorities for 2 years. But they were all ones that were these, they called them the inspired ones. They were all ones that had this prophetic outpouring on them. So they would listen to God, and God would say, go here and do this and do that. But it included some killing, which is very problematic. So talk about hard. I was like, okay, Lord, did you really tell them to do that? But they
Yeah.
sincerely believed that's what they were hearing, and there was no justice otherwise. So anyway, so it deals with the underground church, the prophetic movement, and the Huguenot revolt.
All the
So
historical issues that we take for granted stuff. Like I've lived in third world countries and seen stuff like even back in the 90s where kids didn't have TVs and they didn't have this, they didn't have that, and running water and all that. So you got to remember, like you're saying, like back then there was not like libraries and Barnes and Nobles
no,
and nothing. I
no,
mean, there was nothing. There was like
yeah,
there wasn't public libraries really back then either and stuff. So I thought, you're conveying something that's really important to the story that when these people did this kind of thing, when they were inspired, like just speak and to know all this. I mean, we take for granted now,
yeah,
here
yeah,
sometimes I got friends who are pastors and they feel like they're being persecuted because they say, God bless you to somebody at Walmart who sneezed and the person scoffed at them. I'm like, well, that's not
Yeah.
really persecution, but okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
But
well,
there's
you're
an
talking.
atmosphere going on. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
but
but what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
talking about, that environment is so
Yeah.
intense. Like this would be an amazing, like TV series, or like I could see like a movie coming out of this, man, or something,
Yeah.
So it's
It
pretty
was it
cool.
was an intense time. And as I said, the craziest things that happened are the things that literally happened. Some of the people involved wrote memoirs. So some of what is
Wow.
there is like their firsthand. Yeah, it's crazy. So
So did you get through? Did you get to some of these memoirs and all that kind of stuff? Did you actually
yeah,
get to read?
yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
that's really interesting. So So now you've got the third one in the works, and maybe fourth, maybe you said, like you might
Yeah.
have enough. All right, so that happens a lot to people, even like in sports. Some of the best coaches, like I follow Liverpool, it's a big English team,
Yeah,
and when they
yeah,
win the Champions League, big thing, right, in Europe, and they
yeah,
win the Premier
yeah,
League in England, which is hard and big, and then but they lift up the trophy, and like the next day, the coach just starts working on the next
yes,
season. It's like it's like yeah, yeah, okay, but it's the joy is in the journey.
yes, that's
Joy is in
right.
the journey, not the destination. So I just want to encourage you to keep going on the journey, because it sounds like you've got this cool little journey going on. Like you're just,
Yeah, thank you. That's a
I love
great,
it.
thank you. I'm receiving so much for that. So that was a
Just-
great example. A great, yeah,
well, that's the
perfect.
thing is even John Maxwell is known for his leadership books, right? John Maxwell. But I
Yes.
actually, that's fine. But I liked one. It talked about Michael Jordan. It was a small book.
Mhm.
And I believe the title of it might be Joy in the Journey, actually, by John Maxwell.
Mhm.
And I read this after I got saved in the 90s. An older lady, she's a Christian girl, said, "Here, read this." I'm like, "What? It's John Maxwell. I don't want to be a leader. I'm still learning the Bible. I'm not." And she's like, "It's not about leadership. It's about,
Mm,
it's about the journey." I was
mm,
like,
mm.
man, they use Michael Jordan as an example of how he went through basketball, and he's constantly, and then he went to baseball, he went back to basketball. It was just like everywhere they go, it's the journey. So as Christians, as we're traveling and asking God for favor and asking Him, what do you want me to do today? And be expectant.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
wanted to say one more thing about the discipline. What I hear you saying is, as you're building yourself in discipline, you're probably also training yourself to be expectant, to
Mhm.
expect
Mhm.
something, right? Because you
Mhm.
wouldn't
That's
keep
right.
going day after day,
Yes,
without some
right.
type of expectation. So maybe
Mhm.
speak for a second on that feeling of expectation, because I think you seem like the type of person you can't be a glass is half empty and keep showing up every day to
Yeah.
do this, right? So talk about that feeling of expectation and moving on.
Yeah. Well, I think b- because I've done it enough now, I'm still not like experienced, but I'm farther down the road than when I started. And um, it is that joy of when that flow starts happening, like you were saying with the music, and you're messing around or messing up, and then all of a sudden something comes together. So and also it's just like I know I've also so it's there's that, there's the keeping on going for that, and then just keeping praying that the flow of the spirit will keep coming. And God's called me to do this, so he's gonna give me what I need. It doesn't mean there's not days where I like literally type erase, type erase, type erase. I'm like, okay, this is a
Yeah.
hard day, this is a rough day. I feel like I'm a 10-year-old, maybe less, in terms of my sentences. She went to the store. It was just like I like, oh, can I even do this? But I know if I don't just keep pushing through, I won't get to the next place. It's just like in any sport or art, you just have to keep going. So, and the more that I do that, it's not easy, but it's easier. I think anybody who does the sport or any other kind of art can relate to that. So, and then for the joy of when the things come and then there's like oh, she's going to be a writer. Like in the last book, I didn't plan on it. And she ends up, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can write about her being a writer. Like I did not plan that. And I needed her to do something at this one point. It was really interesting. So those fun surprises are really, fun to, and then, and then the other thing I've learned is that when I have not been disciplined and not like sometimes, done more things around the house, than sit down and I have less time. I have only 2 hours instead of 3 or 4. And sometimes it can't be avoided, but if it's like I was really procrastinating, I could have done those things later, and I don't get as much done. or a few times I've not kept to the discipline of like, this is my time, I write and I do something else. I don't feel well. I feel like I feel out of joint or out of place, like I feel like something's wrong. And it's not a condemnation wrong. It's like, no, I need to be doing this. So then knowing that feeling is pleasant helps me get through the, okay, I'll just keep writing sentences till one of them actually looks good, and something starts happening and I can change all this later, and I don't know how people did it when they wrote on paper and were dipping pen in ink,
Oh my
because,
gosh.
with computers, you just can erase a million times. It doesn't, or even a typewriter,
Remember
like,
those days?
yeah, we have it so easy, in terms of, if it's rough, you can just write words, and sometimes the other thing I found to do is just like, sometimes I shut my eyes and just start writing, and that
Cool.
somehow helps too. So, but all of that to say is like, when the days that I haven't written, and I should have, there weren't days that it was okay because I needed to do this other thing, but I just feel out of sorts. I feel like off, and I'm like, yeah, no, I need to be doing this. It's where I'm supposed to be. So.
Amen. Well, I love it. I hope everybody else is enjoying it as much as I am. It's kind of like when you're playing music. I also learned that too, like going out and playing in places. It's like I try to do music that people enjoy because, that's part of my
Right,
hope.
right.
But to be honest with you, I'm enjoying it. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, so there is a reality in that God's called you to it, and it's no maybe if people don't understand His calling on your life, that doesn't matter because it's for you,
Right,
right? And
right.
then in that is where you feel if you're traveling in that, then that's where you feel normal, no matter how hard it is, right? And then if you kind
That's
of
right.
if you diverge from it, then you find that you're discerning now that that's uncomfortable. You're not really
Yeah,
where you're supposed to be, right? So I encourage other
exactly.
people that really do want to reach out to you. I hope they do, and they get a hold of you. And because I
Yeah.
have a feeling you can probably help a lot of people in this area.
Oh, I'd be
I love
happy
it.
to. Because I'm not the long time established writer. I'm like late in life, figuring it out, Didn't
But
think I
that's
was crazy.
perfect.
Didn't think I could. Yeah. So I can help people who struggle.
No,
So,
that's all right. That's all great, man. I love it. Now, Lisa Harris is another lady that was in our church. I don't know if you know Lisa and her work, all her books. Yeah, Sarah, I have to send you a link. She's a writer. Oh man, my wife reads 3 or 4 books a week. So
oh,
she's
good.
read all of Lisa's, and so I'll have to hook you up
Oh,
with
I could
Lisa's
check
stuff.
her out.
Anyways, so lastly, before we close, have you met any interesting people in your journeys? Have you got any cool stories about where you've traveled in Europe at all besides France?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, oh yeah, we have so many stories. Let me think. I think, well, for me, I mentioned earlier that Bodhi Taney's books were really instrumental. They personally loved them, and then so in between, when we lived in France the first time, we went back to California, and then we moved to Hawaii working with Youth with a Mission. It was a crazy move, but God said do it. And I was really unhappy. And I was like, and then we came back to France as we planned, and it all made sense later. But I was in the first months there and I wasn't happy to be there. I knew God wanted us to be, but I was like, felt really confused. And then I found out that Bodhi Taney was coming to our YWAM base to give a writing seminar.
Cool. Wow.
I was looking online at the YWAM website, like, yeah, I'm here at YWAM now. What do I have to figure this out? And I still had a couple kids at home. So my husband was more full-time ministry and I was part-time, and I looked and there's this writing seminar and it was at the church that we were attending around the corner from our house. Anyway, ended up going and we became friends. And so,
Cool.
and she endorsed my first book and and we're still friends, on Facebook, but I mean, she's a lovely person. And years later, her grandson came and did a outreach here and we did human trafficking work. And I did that for many years and we did it in a nearby town. And I'm out in the car with her grandson. And I was just like, Lord, thank you. I can't believe I got to meet this person that was like my hero. And she's just a wonderful woman, now
That's
she's my
awesome.
friend, and she's a wonderful person.
I
So
love it.
that was a God thing. And yeah, I think some of my other really, it's been really special to go places that are very different. Like in Youth with the Mission, we go on a lot of short-term missions. So I've been to Croatia and Thailand, I've been to 40 countries, but like the ones that stand out are French Polynesia was really interesting because we were living in Hawaii, and yet it was French speaking, and I spoke French, and I was like, oh, this is a convergence of our worlds. This is so
That is
interesting.
strange. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just been, and ended up on a little island off the island of Bora Bora and lived with this family in a shack, and there was a wild pig, and it was right down the same little, it's called a motu, it's the little island off the island, um as the 4-star, 5-star, whatever, the most expensive. Like Nicole Kidman was staying down, one of the people we were staying with was like a maid in the hotel, and she goes, oh yeah, Nicole Kidman's there with her new husband, but I'm like, okay, but we would rather be here, like seriously. I mean, I'd never say no to going to that kind of place like that,
Right.
but honestly, we all looked, and we had teenagers with us, and they go, we'd all rather be here with, we called them mommy and puppy, we called them like grandma and grandpa, the people we were living with. And it was like we were family, and we're sat on the beach, and they caught dinner for us, and it was Nemo. It looked like Nemo, but we ate Nemo for dinner.
Nemo.
And we had to, and I'm trying to eat it with my fork. It was really fresh, but it's Nemo. It's blue and yellow striped. Anyway, and one of the girls goes,
That's awesome.
Jeanette, and she's like, eat with your fingers. And I'm like, okay. So just and yet sharing the Lord, we did Bible studies with them every night. So it's just, those kinds of things where you meet the Lord in those different places, and how the Lord meets you no matter where you are. I've been reading my Bible on that same place, thinking I am so remote. And I was reading Psalm 139, and it says, where can I go to be away from your presence? And I'm like, nowhere, because you're here with me. And I'm like, so remote, like, it was pretty funny. So, yeah, those are just a few that come to
Those are
mind.
great. Thanks for sharing that. I love it because you just don't know like where you might find something interesting. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the name of that book that just hit me all of a sudden, because I was gonna say "Joy in the Journey" is kind of what's you were talking about here, is the
Yeah.
success journey. I think is the name of the book by
Oh,
John
okay.
John Maxwell, a
Okay.
small one, but yeah, there's
Yeah.
that joy in the journey thing as you keep talking about all this stuff. I mean, that
Mhm.
could be a story right there, talking about
Mhm.
all that. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's probably
Oh,
Keith
that's an
Urban. It's
idea.
probably Keith Urban with Kidman.
Yeah.
That's
I think it
yeah,
was.
yeah,
It
the
was.
Australian.
They'd been married that year or something. I can't remember. Yeah. It was like,
Yeah,
we're like,
I play
hey.
guitar, so I know who he is. That's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Who cares? You don't need
Yeah.
them people anyways. You're good.
No, no. And yeah.
That's funny. So
Yeah.
now, what's next for you? You've got the 2 books. Do you plan on staying in France? I don't know why the balloons keep going up. Look at this. I don't know. Is it
That's
bees?
hilarious. That's so funny.
What is
Oh, I
going
love
on?
it. It's
Yesterday
just
it
we're
was raining.
celebrating.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't touch anything.
No, it's on my
Yes.
end.
Yeah.
But so
Yeah.
so do you plan on staying in France?
Hmm.
For the rest of your
Hmm.
days? Is that your plan at the moment? And
Yeah.
do you have any other ideas besides books?
Hmm. As far as we know, we're staying here until the Lord moves us elsewhere. We own our home. We've invested a lot in the home, not only money, but I mean time and energy in the land, gardening, developing it. We really are trying to be as self-sustaining as possible. And if there comes a time where people need more people are more needy and need a place to stay, we're working towards that. And
Cool.
so um as and so leaving here would be no small thing, because we are homeowners and all that. So and it's an unusual property that I don't think would sell overnight. So and we have no desire to leave. We do miss our children. I do miss living near them and our grandchildren. I'm grateful for technology, that we can do things like this, and I'll but so no, we're here unless the Lord says something differently. But our call was to France, and we're here until he says
So
otherwise.
more
And
books on the horizon, and then no audio books or anything like that too, or is it just all like in
yeah, I
print
get
form?
asked about that
Mm-hmm.
somewhat frequently, and I would love to do that. It's quite expensive, and it's another whole layer of things. So I'm going to concentrate right now just on getting them written and getting them published. I also have a French translation of my first book, and it's before a pretty big publishing house here, and it's made to the second round. So pray if
Come
you
on,
would,
come on,
that they
let's
take
go.
it,
Thank you,
because it
Lord.
would distribute it would distribute widely if and that would be such a blessing. And my second prayer is that they would take the second book and pay for the translation. I paid for the
Ooh.
translation for the first one,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Somebody did it for me at a cut rate and did a fabulous job, but it's still expensive and
Right.
rightfully so. And this person loved the story. God just brought me the perfect person. And he's the one that made the connection to this publishing house. So I'd love it if they'd hire him to translate the second one and get that out there. So I'm working on that, getting the third book and fourth book done. And then I would like to keep going with books. So those are my plans. I have, like even you just said, oh, that could be a good story. I'd love to write some different nonfiction.
Yeah.
I do have a whole set of chapters on our life in Paris. And the Lord one day gave me a title for that. That was actually the first time he spoke to me about writing. We lived in Paris and I was opening my windows and I could see the sky and I was like, there's a sky above Paris. And he said, that's the name of the book you're going to write. And I was
That's
like,
cool.
I'm going to write a book. And so I have the chapters, but it's about our life there and a lot of things happen, but it needs to turn into more of a story.
Right.
Excuse me. So I think I could do that now. So
yeah, so it sounds like you've got a lot of ideas and God's been working with you, so that's good. Hopefully all that stuff gets nurtured and gets taken care of, and then you can get it out, right? Because that's the thing I always tell my wife and my kids is we're blessed to be a blessing.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's a whole different perspective between just being blessed.
Yes.
It's like, okay, that's nice. But that's really not how God wants to do it. You're blessed to be a blessing. So I hope all that stuff does get out there, Janet. That'd be awesome. I love it.
Thank you
maybe
so
if
much.
we ever get over to France at all, I'll have to, if my wife runs in Paris or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think because I'm sure they have marathons.
Welcome. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
And I'm sure they got soccer teams. I know about soccer teams there.
Yes. We're having the Olympics this year, in Paris.
Oh, that's right.
And in other parts around France too.
Right,
so
correct. Yeah, it'll be all different venues and stuff over there.
Yeah.
Well, Janet, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you. It's been awesome.
Oh, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I do. I feel filled up. So thank you.
There you go. Yeah, come on. Now, like I said, I'm blessed to be a blessing.
Yeah.
So
well, you
receive.
are. Truly.
I did. The 90s. Whoa.
That's right.
Falling down the
spirit. I did. I'm good.
All right. Well, Janet, we'll end on that note, and I'll put everything in the show notes, and we'll have everything there for you guys. And tell your husband I said hello. I can't wait to meet him. And have a blessed day. I appreciate it so much, Janet.
You too.
Thanks for being on the show. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.